Okay, welcome to our debates over tariffs. And the format of the debate will be each speaker will have 10 minutes for an opening statement, and then they'll have 5 minutes each for rebuttal, and then 3 minutes each for closing comments. And after that, we'll have time for Q&A by students. I decided we don't need a vote. It would embarrass one side. It's a very biased group on this thing. But this will be very educational. So I'll just introduce the speakers and we'll get going. Our first speaker, who will go first, is Spencer Morrison. He's a lawyer, a sessional instructor of law, an independent intellectual with a focus on applied philosophy, empirical history, and practical economics. He's the author of the book Reshore, How Tariffs Will Bring Our Jobs Home and Revive the American Dream. He's also editor-in-chief of the National Economics editorial. His work has been featured on major publications, including the BBC, Real Clear Politics, Blaze Media, The Daily Caller, The American Thinker, American Greatness, The Western Journal, and the Foundation for Economic Education, which hopefully you're all familiar with. So that's Spencer. Delta Airlines lost his clothing, his luggage, and so Murray has an advantage. He looks a little more distinguished with his coat. Okay, Murray Sabrin, Dr. Murray Sabrin is an emeritus professor of finance at Ramapo College of New Jersey. He's only one of two PhD students who earned his degree under Murray Rothbard. Dr. Sabrin is considered a public intellectual for writing about the economy in scholarly and popular publications. His book, The Finance of Healthcare, Wellness, and Innovative Approaches to Employee Medical Insurance, and his other publication, Navigating the Boom and Bust Cycle, An Entrepreneur's Survival Guide, provides decision makers with tools needed to help manage their businesses during the business cycle. Murray Sabrin's memoir, From Immigrant to Public Intellectual, An American Story, was published in November of 2022. My favorite Murray Sabrin book is authored Why the Federal Reserve Sucks. His first book, Tax-Free 2000, outlines how to create a tax-free society in the 21st century. And so introduce yourself to Murray later. Our first speaker will be Spencer for 10 minutes. And when I put my finger up, I'm not giving you the finger. It means you have 1 minute. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I apologize for my attire. Baggage lost. We can blame Delta for that one. I'd also like to thank Tom DeLorenzo and the Mises University for putting this on for all of you. I think it's a great educational experience, especially to partake and listen to a debate. Debate is, in my view, the best way to test the truth value of any proposition. I'd like to thank my interlocutor as well, Murray Sabrin. Now, the proposition that's before us today is that tariff taxes will create prosperity. I'd like to begin by refining that a little bit and talk about what all of that means. It, of course, is no surprise to any of you. Tariffs are a tax. They're a tax on imports, and this tax can have two effects. The first effect is that it can raise revenue. We're all aware of that. And then second, if a tariff is sufficiently high, and a tipping point is reached, it can be used to promote domestic manufacturing. That is, it makes imports too expensive to purchase, and accordingly, people will produce and purchase domestic goods. In terms of what we're talking about when we talk about prosperity, I'll be talking about material wealth, and in particular, material wealth for Americans. I'm not so concerned about whether or not tariffs decrease global wealth. I don't care. This is, from my view, America's trade policy needs to prioritize America's well-being. So the first question that we need to begin to ask is, how do you actually grow the economy? And it sounds like a very simple question, The problem with many economic theories is that economic growth is exogenous to those models. Economic growth is presumed, and you can tweak it by doing particular policies. You can increase the rate of economic growth, decrease it, but nothing gets to the heart of what economic growth actually is. So we're going to start very basic. How do you grow the economy? There's only two ways to grow the economy. You either have to make more output, we'll call it stuff, you make more stuff, or number two, you make better stuff, that's more valuable stuff. In terms of how do we actually go about doing that, how do you make more stuff? Again, there's two ways you can do that. First, you can work harder, that is, add time to produce more output. You could work evenings, you could work weekends, you could hire more people to do the job. The problem with adding time to create more output is that the gains from it are geometric. That is, hour in leads to another hour of output. And of course, time is finite. There's only so many people, there's only so many hours. But the better way to do that is to work smarter. That is, make more product in the same amount of time, increase productivity. Now, classical economics, going back to Adam Smith, 1776 Wealth of Nations, provides some ways to do that. Number one, it's the accumulation of capital. You want to produce more apples, plant more apple trees. The problem with the accumulation of capital as a long-run strategy is you can only plant so many apple trees. You only have so much land. And again, you only have so much time to harvest those materials. So this brings us to Adam Smith's second point, it's the division of labor. And this is picked up by David Ricardo in his On the Principles of Political Economy and Taxation. Dividing labor, of course, increases productivity. You could have one person climb the cherry picker, pick the apples. You could have another guy take the buckets to market with the apples. And then, of course, from Ricardo's perspective, you can increase productivity by maximizing your comparative advantage. That is, trading with a different country for something that you're not relatively good at making, get something that they're relatively good at making, makes everybody richer. Now, of course, that's undisputed. But the problem, again, is that you can only divide labor so much before you reach a terminal level of complexity, where you can no longer divide that labor and produce any more productivity gains. So the problem with all of these ways to grow the economy is that they're all cap out at a certain point. So the only way that you can increase productivity in the long run, once all the gains from trade are done, once all the gains from dividing labor are done, are to increase your technology. Now, technology is also the key to making better stuff, right? It's the reason that this phone that I have here is more powerful than any supercomputer from the 1980s. Technology is a beautiful thing because it allows us to make more stuff in the same amount of time and better stuff. And the benefit of technology is that the gains from technology are exponential. For example, 1440, Gutenberg's printing press used to take a scribe, it could produce 40 pages of text in a day. Printing press with movable type allowed them to produce 3,600 pages a day. Printing press was 90 times more efficient than somebody scribbling a text. So technology is a key to increasing wealth. So I think economists in general are asking the wrong question. When we want to decide on a policy to grow the economy, the question that we need to ask ourselves is this policy going to increase our ability to generate new technology and deploy that new technology in the long run? And this is the issue ultimately at the core of this debate. My position stands for the observation that tariffs strategically used will actually help America to develop that technology and to keep our technological edge, as opposed to what's happening right now, where we are offshoring, advanced manufacturing and increasingly advanced research and development. So this brings us to maybe the core question: how do you grow technology? And this is a code that's very difficult to crack. Ultimately, technology is what I would call a black swan event, to borrow terms from Nassim Nicholas Taleb. All that means is that the technological genesis is a highly improbable event, and yet it's highly consequential. Now, it's also a process that is autocatalytic, in that technologically advanced countries and technologically advanced industries are those that are more likely to generate new technology in the future. And I think that's pretty obvious if you threw, Isaac Newton in with a bunch of grade 8 math students and you said, come up with the next big thing in mathematics. It doesn't matter how many grade 8 students you have churning at the mathematics. Isaac Newton will win again and again and again every single time. And then that's the exact same thing that we've seen with economic growth and technological development. Countries that were at the forefront of the Industrial Revolution or early adopters of that technology today carry significant economic inertia with them. Wealth begets wealth, knowledge begets knowledge, and technology begets technology. This brings us to the crisis that we have on our hands today. Since 1974, America has run a large and chronic trade deficit. The cumulative value of that trade deficit is over $28 trillion. The composition of that trade deficit is overwhelmingly in manufactured goods, increasingly in advanced manufactured goods. On top of that, companies have been exporting their research and development all over the world. This is a huge problem because we are literally exporting our ability to build the future to foreign countries. The purpose of tariffs is to stop this offshoring vicious cycle and ensure that the industries that are most likely to generate that new technology remain in America. The point of it is to, again, maintain that economic inertia. I don't have time to talk specifically about some of the ingredients that go into making inventions more likely. I'll summarize very briefly. Competition is something that's important, and it's something that my friend is going to mention. But I would like to mention that, as regards competition, competition is fractal and it occurs across different levels, right? So you have competition between individuals, competition between businesses, competition between countries. One of the things that, this global free trade has done is it's shrunk the competition levels, killing off local businesses, killing off small businesses, and eroding national competition. If we want ultimately to increase our technology, we have to protect the golden goose, and we're not doing that. I believe we're running low on time, so I'll turn this over to my friend, and I'll be happy to have a brief rebuttal.
Okay. All right. Thank you for being here this afternoon, and thank you for the Mises Institute for sponsoring this event, which is the slaying of tariffs and protectionism rather than a debate. And this is a very important issue because tariffs and protectionism are a subset of a much larger issue facing the country, interventionism versus economic freedom. In the next few minutes, I will show conclusively that Mises, Rothbard, and others who applied the principles of the Austrian School are overwhelmingly correct, namely that tariffs and protectionism are not only anti-economic freedom, but also cause conflict and lower living standards, and therefore cannot create prosperity. In other words, keeping with the theme of Benjamin Powell and Robert Lawson's book, Socialism Sucks, and my book, Why the Federal Reserve Sucks, I welcome anyone to write the next book in this genre, Tariffs and Protectionism Suck. So let's look at the economy from a 30,000-foot level. This is from Murray Rothbard's great essay from 1962, and it's more relevant today, I think, than it was back then. This is originally published in a collection of essays called In Search of a Monetary Constitution. It was republished in The Case for 100% Gold Dollar, and if you haven't read that essay yet, I urge you to read it. And what Rothbard does on page 5 you're going to get a lot of footnotes and bibliography here. What he shows is production of goods and services, which is created by savings and investment. In other words, capital formation is the foundation of a market economy. I've gotten to the point of concluding that we shouldn't use the word free market because it's redundant. You either have a market or you have a hampered market. And that's why markets inherently are free. That means the buyers and the sellers voluntarily get together to exchange goods and services for money. That is reality. It's not a theory, it's reality. The Mises Institute raises money to have you here. Netflix, Apple, Magnificent Seven, they all provide goods and services to the people for which people voluntarily pay for their goods and services. Now, teaching in the business school, all my students, whether they're management majors, marketing, finance, accounting, IT, are in the production area. Why do they do so? To provide a good and service to the public and for which they get money. They're not doing it voluntarily. In turn, they take that money and buy goods and services that they want. So I presented this to every class the first day of classes for 35 years, and students got it. Unfortunately, the people in Washington don't get it because this is a laissez-faire economy. Government is basically absent. So you say, well, what about the courts, the police? Well, we have private courts, we have private police. What about national defense? Well, one way of doing it is give everyone an AK-47, so I can't wait to get mine, okay? So this is not a theory, this is the reality of how we, human beings, get together voluntarily, peacefully, to exchange goods for money and services for money, and so on and so forth. But the key to this thing, I was in the finance department or program. We had a course called capital formation that one of my colleagues taught. You cannot have an advanced economy without capital formation, and that comes from savings. And as Spencer saw, you need innovation, invention. One of my favorite books that I have at home, one of these oversized books that you see at a dentist's office on the table, is They Made America. Not one politician is in there. It's all the great entrepreneurs from the 1700s up to the present. These are the people that made America. So the next slide shows, what did Mises say about the issues facing the country? This is from the late 50s. Nothing is more important today than to enlighten public opinion about the basic differences between genuine liberalism, which advocates the free market economy, and the various interventionist parties, which are advocating government interference with prices, wages, the rate of interest, profits and investment, confiscatory taxation, and I underline this, tariffs and other protections measures, and huge government spending, and finally inflation. In other words, Mises said, the problem in the country, this is the late 50s, where we had 1% inflation, virtually no national debt, or compared to today, virtually nothing. Tax rates were high. The marginal tax rate was 91%, I think, at the time, but very few people made that. And so Mises said the essence of civilization is to have a market economy. Then Rothbard said, whereas genuine free traders look at free markets and trade, domestic and international, from the point of view of the consumer, that is all of us, the mercantilists, proponents of tariffs, quotas, you name it, of the 16th century or today, looks at trade from the point of view of power elite, big business, in league with the government. The mercantilists want to privilege the government business elite at the expense of all consumers. This is Rothbard's example of showing that interventionism, which is outlined in the wonderful book, Power and Market, of how every government intervention is counterproductive, that doesn't achieve the goals that the interventionists believe will make the economy better. In other words, the structure of production doesn't need to be managed. Government officials are not smarter than entrepreneurs. Do you really think Bernie Sanders and AOC know how to run a business? Okay. In addition, the free trade argument, and I'm using that word deliberately, the free trade argument comes from 3 weeks ago, the celebration of the Declaration of Independence. It talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How do you sustain your life? You have to trade. Anybody know how to farm? Anybody know how to make a laptop, a cell phone, do streaming services? This is the division of labor that makes what we have today possible. Okay? So life, we have to trade in order to sustain our lives. Liberty, and here's the real important point. The freedom to trade with anyone we want, domestically and internationally, and invest wherever we desire. Our natural rights, according to the Declaration, comes from, as Judge Napal talks about, our humanity. We have the right to engage other people peacefully, using peaceful means to achieve goals, and pursuit of happiness, seeking the best outcomes for ourselves and using peaceful means, okay? In addition, and here's something that I think the people who advocate tariffs, quotas, and other interventions in trade haven't read the Declaration. Because one of the grievances the colonists had is for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. That doesn't sound like a prescription for what? Tariffs and quotas and intervention in trade. And for imposing taxes on us without our consent. There is a case going through the courts now where the Trump administration is being sued for unilaterally increasing tariffs when Article 1, Section 8 states clearly that it's only a congressional prerogative, not the president by edict imposing taxes. Okay, this is a chart of tax rates over the years. So the notion that tariffs increase prosperity, and you see this big move right here. That's the Great Depression. Tariffs went through the roof. Did that create prosperity around the world? Global trade was cut by 2/3 because of the tariffs. You set up walls, financial walls around each country. And what created prosperity? After World War II, the nations realized we better cut tariffs because that was one of the primary causes of World War II, the trade wars that we had. So what did they do? In 1947, the late 40s, we had GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. They reduced tariffs around the world, and the world economy boomed tremendously. Okay? And look what we have now, a spike in tariffs under the Trump administration. So if you look at this, you say, my goodness, why are we repeating the horrible mistakes of the past? And as President DiLorenzo has written in his essays and books, tariffs were the primary cause, if not the primary cause of what? The war between the states. He's outlined this in several essays on Mises.org. Tariffs create conflict. The last chart is the one that in 3 weeks, we have a very ominous anniversary, August 15th, 1971, a financial Pearl Harbor by President Nixon, severing the dollar from gold. And what's happened since then, this is a chart. Since then, unit labor costs have gone through the roof. That's the blue line. Real wages have stagnated. And even Spencer acknowledges that. But his argument, and we'll do this during the rebuttal as well, his argument is severing the gold standard leads to trade deficits. So A caused B. So what he's advocating is C, tariffs. So that is a non sequitur. If you really want to get rid of the trade deficits, which I don't think we have to do, we'll do that in the rebuttal and during the Q&A. If you really want a market economy that's going to increase prosperity for the vast majority of the American people, you have as much as a laissez-faire economy as possible, free trade, so people can trade with the best possible value around the world. That, to me, is just self-evident. It should be part of the Declaration of Independence, sort of the unfinished part of the American Revolution. Trade is natural. It's our inherent right to trade with whomever we want. And as we'll go through the rebuttal, you'll see that the trade deficit, from my perspective, is a non-issue. Thank you very much.
How many minutes? So my friend has brought up that tariffs reduce economic freedom, and this may be true in a rarefied and platonic sense, but we don't live in a platonic society, we live in reality. And the reality is that the American markets are open to foreign competition. And the competitors are typically backed by their governments. In particular, America's economy has been flooded with Chinese goods. Chinese producers are funded by the government. They function as a de facto arm of the state, and they are crushing in American small businesses, medium businesses, and large businesses by dumping products into the market at below-cost rates, killing American industries. And of course, what happens after they finish dumping products? They're free to jack up the price. We live in a world where governments are indeed picking winners and losers. My contention is that we should be picking American companies to be the winners as opposed to Chinese companies. Doing nothing is akin to letting China run the economy. A problem that I have with economics in general is that economic theories are not sensitive to time horizons. What this means is that an efficient trade today is not necessarily a good investment tomorrow. A good example of this is NVIDIA. NVIDIA is now worth over $4 trillion. NVIDIA is an American company, but guess what? All of the production for NVIDIA, all of the GPUs it's making are made actually over in Taiwan. All of the actual human capital, all of the physical capital of NVIDIA is located abroad. It's not here in America. From my perspective, we should be thinking of the economy like businessmen and investors. We should be investing in our own businesses. We should be investing in the tech of the future. Because the reality is that we have all of this money on paper, all of this value doesn't actually exist. It's not here. It's a fake economy. Another issue that I have is that this economic, you trade goods for goods. This only works when you're actually trading output for output, but that's not what's happening when we have a trade deficit. When we're running a trade deficit, it means that we're importing more than we're exporting, buying more than we're selling. So the question becomes, how do we actually pay for all of that? And we pay for it by selling assets and by selling debt. We sell assets, for example, real estate. Last year, foreigners bought up $40 billion worth of American real estate, jacking up housing prices for people so they can't afford places to live. Money flows into the stock market. 17% of American stocks are now foreign owned. And of course, we have the national debt. Almost $9 trillion of that is owned by foreigners, and we're paying them interest. And that's what happens when we don't trade goods for goods. That's what happens when we don't actually have an economy. What we're doing is we're selling our past and mortgaging our future so that we can consume more today. But you wouldn't do that in your private life, so why are we doing it as a nation? My friend has also noted that trade is necessary, and he has equivocated between trade domestically, like me and my butcher, and trade between us and people in a foreign nation. Of course, this is not at all what the Constitution or the Founding Fathers had envisioned. The reality is, actually, that the Founding Fathers, the first act was the Tariff Act of 1789, and that was signed by President George Washington, and it was created under the advice of Alexander Hamilton, who set up the American system, which was designed to facilitate domestic production so that America was self-sufficient. Because you remember during the American Revolution, it almost didn't get off the ground. Why? Because we didn't have firearms. We couldn't manufacture cannon. We couldn't even manufacture steel. All of that had to come from France and the Netherlands and other countries that were giving it to the American Revolutionary Army. If you want to defend freedom, if you want to have a country, you actually have to make things, because otherwise you were at the mercy of foreign powers. The last issue that I would like to address is this freedom to consume, the freedom to purchase. Unrestricted freedom has, unfortunately, in certain circles of the conservative sphere, become a golden idol that is being worshipped. I would like to note, though, for the record and for everybody watching, that the pursuit of freedom, while it's important, has been overstated. Freedom is one moral axis among others that need to be balanced. And this is the heart of conservatism, all the way going back to, Aristotle and his Politics, Reflections on the Revolution of France, written by Edmund Burke. People we need to recognize are not just atomized individuals that are here to consume. People have overlapping ontological identities which are important. For example, I'm an individual, but I'm also a son, I'm a brother, I'm a member of a community. And these identities are important, and they are real and they exist. And we have to prioritize a better balancing act. If we pursue, the freedom to consume at all costs, this leads to some pretty evil and perverse outcomes. For example, we find ourselves trading with, people in China who are using de facto slave labor to make products. We need to prioritize our own communities and our own nation. Otherwise, what are we fighting for?
Okay. Let me begin by saying, be careful what you wish for when you want to introduce tariffs and protectionism. Ronald Reagan's one of the most famous lines of his was, the most dangerous sentence in the English language is, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help you." There have been articles and articles in the mainstream press about how towns who you would think would benefit from tariffs are getting hurt by the tariffs. And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal the other day about Cummins aircraft. They get parts from all over the world. One of my early days at Ramapo College was a commencement, and the president of Volvo was the speaker. This is the late 80s, folks, when Trump said Japan is going to take over the world. Well, that didn't happen, did it? What did the president of Volvo say? Volvo is a Swedish car, but yes, virtually every major component comes from what? Singapore, Germany, Belgium. It's an international car, even though it has a Swedish label. Having said that, what made the United States economy so productive and strong for the past 200 plus years? We're one big free trade area. Could you imagine if we had tariffs among the 50 states? Or the governor of my state, Florida, Governor DeSantis said, you know what? There are no cars manufactured in Florida. We're going to put a tariff on those dastardly manufacturers for not producing in Florida. Would anyone take him seriously? That we should have tariffs on Florida residents because there are no cars made in Florida? There's another point here that's very important to make. Mises pointed out the economy is a profit and loss system. There will be profits and losses. When the profits are greater than the losses, the economy expands. I have a list here of companies in my lifetime and your lifetime that are no longer here because they didn't meet consumers' needs. How many of you know Pan Am, TWA, Eastern? Trump Shuttle, People's Express, no longer around because they didn't service consumers. What about Kmart, Sears Roebuck, Montgomery Ward? The list goes on and on. There are hundreds of companies that were iconic U.S. companies. The A&P supermarket chain, around for more than 140 years, no longer in existence. So the point is, if you don't have a free market, you don't have price discovery. You don't have the opportunity to invest where you think get the highest value for your shareholders or yourself if you're an entrepreneur. In other words, what the free market does, it creates peaceful conditions for people to get along to make sure that goods and services are available to people who want them. And if people don't want them, you're going to suffer losses and you either have to restructure or go out of business or merge. That is the dynamics of a market economy. And anyone tries to tinker with it will have to argue that they know better than the entrepreneurs of how to organize the structure of production. Now, that to me is arrogant. That to me is just not in tune with the reality of the way people organize themselves. And Spencer made a point here. 1 minute? 1 minute. Spencer made once, and I said this in the opening remarks, but I'll say it again. He said that it's very a Misesian Rothbardian statement. He says, the fact is that the chronic trade deficits we face today would never have been possible under a gold standard. True, and that's why unit labor costs have gone up and companies have gone overseas. I just did a back of an envelope calculation last year with my expenditures. It was well into six figures for the independent living facility where we rent and all the other vendors that we buy. Did I lose any sleep over it? And my living standards down because I had a trade deficit with all the people in my geographic area? Absolutely not. We have earnings, and then we use those earnings for our benefit. For an outside, a third party to say, hey, Sabrin, you're not doing the right thing. you don't have a trade balance with your vendors. You cannot have a trade balance with our vendors because we're getting something of value, and that's why we pay them. So the notion that entrepreneurs need direction from Washington is a very disingenuous and spurious argument, because if they were so good in organizing the economy, they would be in the economy instead of giving us what? Mandates and dictates and all sorts of grief that we have to fill out as a business community. So with that, I think we're good for time. And let's have some Q&A, and I look forward to closing comments. Okay, let's do closing comments.
I like to debate, so rather than make a closing comment, I'm just going to pick up on some of the issues that my friend has raised. To deal with the issue of my friend has equivocated on what a trade deficit is by likening it to a personal deficit. So for example, I go to the butcher or the baker and I buy bread or meat, I have a trade deficit with them. That's true, but you also have income, presumably. And this is the problem at a national level. When we're running a global trade deficit, what that means is that we're running a deficit with everybody. It's an aggregate deficit. It means we're spending more money than we have. You wouldn't do that in your personal life, of course, because if you had a deficit with the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and you were unemployed, how long could you do that for? You could do it until your credit cards run out, or you've run out of things to pawn, right? And at a certain point, you have to produce value. You have to go and get a job, which is what we're doing as a nation. We are living on borrowed time so that we can consume as much as possible, but of course we don't produce enough to actually consume, and as a result we're living in a consumption bubble. And when that bubble bursts, it's going to be much, much worse than if we had just done the work ourselves of building the products that we want to buy. Again, there is an equivocation here between domestic and foreign. My friend has said that America succeeded because it was essentially one big free trade area. And of course, that is true. But what we also have to understand is that it's also one country with one language, one law, one currency. Reality is that different countries are different. When you cannot have free trade with a place like China, which has a different business culture, different languages, far-flung different time zones, you just cannot have that without political integration. And this is a huge problem, and it's something that we've seen with the European Union. The European Union, I may remind everyone, began as the Coal and Steel Commission, and it began as a free trading area. But what the Europeans found is that in order to actually facilitate real free trade, you need legal harmonization. And of course, to harmonize your laws, you have to have political harmonization. And we're now at the point in Europe, for example, before the United Kingdom left Europe, over 76% of all of their laws and regulations were not made in London, they were made in Brussels. And the same is true for every other country in the European Union. So if my friend is honest and serious about having free trade with the rest of the world, the reality is that that is going to lead inexorably towards global unification. It may not be political unification, but it will be legal unification in a lot of ways. And the problem is that if we need to have an independent country, because the American people are not the same as the Chinese people. They're not Brazilians. And in order for that to actually, well, you laugh, but it's true. People are different. Different countries are different. And if America is going to retain itself as an independent nation, you have to have an independent economy. This is not to say that we're opposed to trade. Trade is good, but you can't have unrestricted and unfettered global free trade with people that don't have your best interests at heart.
In preparing for today's presentation, I read Spencer's book, and it's a well-written book with a lot of fallacies in it, so I urge you to read it. Okay. And there's that gem that is very Misesian and Rothbardian about how Nixon severing the gold standard really set into motion the problems we're facing today. $37 trillion in debt, chronic deficits of $2 trillion a year, that are going to explode over the next 5 years. In your lifetime, we may see $100 trillion national debt, if not higher. At 4% interest, that's $25 trillion a year in interest expense. He claims the trade deficits are going to ruin America. No, it's the government deficits that are going to ruin America, just as they have in Argentina and other countries that have had hyperinflation. The governments run huge deficits, the central bank monetizes it, and you're off to the races with hyperinflation. In addition, the analogy that the Chinese are doing bad things, the Europeans are doing bad things, the analogy that I came up with, you may agree with it or not, is if your neighbor is abusing his wife, a very bad thing. So you will say, hey, I got to level the playing field. I'm going to abuse my wife also. To have abuse all over the world. That would be absurd. That's what foreign countries do. They abuse their own citizens. So why should we abuse our citizens if other countries are abusing their citizens? We should set an example. In fact, here's my proposal. If we really want to bring manufacturing and increase the economy of the United States, and I wrote this, it's on Mises.org, toward financial independence and a constitutional federal budget, get rid of the corporate income tax. That would make the United States the greatest magnet for investment in the history of the world. The corporate income tax brings in $530 billion. I can cut $530 billion out of a $7 trillion budget like that. Like that. So if Trump is really serious about reshoring and bringing jobs back and increasing economic growth, get rid of the corporate income tax. They would be lining up in New York City, they'd be lining up in Houston, Miami, Los Angeles, Seattle, all the ports to come and build in America. That's the way you create the economic conditions that's going to benefit everybody, not just the political elite that go to Washington to get a special privilege with tariffs and quotas and the whole 9 yards. We're good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. We have time for a Q&A, and I guess I'll do some finger pointing. How about Tom Woods?
All right. Okay, I can hold it. All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for this. If I may call you Spencer, I just want you to know that when people snickered when you said Brazilians, it was not that they were denying that different peoples are different. We all get that in this room, I promise you. It's just that we happen to have a cohort of Brazilians in the room. So the fact that you chose that nationality of all of them, that was why that happened. So my question is for you, and I think a lot of the questions are going to be for you. I totally am sympathetic with people who say, look, I don't care about global wealth. I care about my country. So if I have to twist things a certain way, I totally hear that. But my concern would be, number one, that if, let's say, we increase tariffs on steel, that it's true that could benefit some steel workers. But what about all the American companies that we say we want to help that use steel as an input? Steel now becomes more expensive. Their job's now harder. And so as a free trader, I also care about those companies. And I sometimes don't hear the tariff proponents concerned about those companies. But I think my main question to you would be that I've always wanted to ask somebody from this tradition this question. If Martians came to America and said, we can give you the goods you need at a 75% discount what you're paying for them now, would you say this is an incredible boon that will make our lives better, or would you indignantly send them away?
Is this thing is on, I assume? Okay. Relating to the first issue, we didn't have a chance to get into it. But of course, different industries have different values. And of course, some industries are more likely to generate new technological growth and benefit from additional technological growth. So when we're talking about tariffs, tariffs correctly applied are going to primarily be protecting advanced value-added industries as opposed to raw materials. Of course, there's been some issue of, why are we imposing tariffs on copper or coffee, right? From my point of view, of course, we want as cheap a natural resources as possible. But we also do want to be exporting and producing value-added production. To deal with the second question, whether or not I would buy anything from Martians, no, I wouldn't trust any Martian. I wouldn't trust Martian production. But this actually gets to the heart of perhaps a deeper issue. And the question is, what is the point of economics? Is the point of economics to make the most efficient trade today? Or is there a broader teleological goal? Is our goal as a society to simply consume as much as humanly possible, or is there something else there? And I would suggest, and I think the conservative position is that we are not simply rational consumers. We are, again, something deeper than that. There is an inherent value in work. And of course, there is a value to having the ability to have an economy that functions for everybody. Right? We need to have an economy that functions not just for the people at the very top, or not just people, who can learn to code, but everyone who is left out of the system. Because not everybody can fundamentally become an engineer or a lawyer or an economist. We need to have an economy that has something for everybody to do, so that they can partake in the economy, so that they can become socialized, so that they can, provide for their families. And, again, that question is, if we could get everything for so cheap, that's great. But then we're not producing anything. What are all of these people doing? Are they living on welfare? Are they just unemployed?
What's this man up here? He's had his arm up the whole time. in the maroon shirt. The maroon shirt.
Behind him.
You're welcome to it.
No, please.
Sorry, just one quick question for you, Mr. Morrison. You mentioned in the very beginning that technology is the core to economic growth. It's the engine of growth. I'm wondering why, in your view, domestic firms are liable to invest more in technological innovation if they're insulated from foreign competition.
Well, the reason for that is precisely the reason that economies that have had access to dirt cheap labor did not invest in new technology or productivity saving devices historically. It's because people take the easy way out, and that's totally rational. The reality is, though, is that higher labor prices and higher standards drive economic innovation. I mean, the reason that we have so many of the technologies that we do coming out of the Industrial Revolution is because there was a massive, massive labor shortage in Great Britain, and they need to get smart about how they were producing their products. The same thing is true about any major war. You have significant economic innovation because people have to do more with less. And of course, since the 1970s, and in particular since 2001, when China joined the World Trade Organization, rather than invest in our own capital, be it human or physical, we are instead just contracting cheap labor in foreign countries to do the work. So that's why we're not investing in labor-saving technologies to the same degree. Why would you bother doing that? You can just hire somebody for cheap.
This is for Spencer Morrison. Since your case relied on the concept of a trade deficit, that importing more than we export is bad for the national interest, I was wanting to know how it is in the national interest to extract our resources, labor, and services and export them to the highest foreign bidder.
I don't understand the question.
If we're not supposed to be importing more than we export, if we need to increase our exports, how is that in the national interest?
I never said we had to increase our exports. We have to increase our production to match our consumption, ideally. We don't want to have large chronic deficits for the same reason that you wouldn't do that in your private life. I mean, the reality is that you have to produce economic value in order to get value, right? So the problem with the trade deficit that we have right now is, again, we're not paying for it by producing goods or services. We're paying for it by selling assets and by selling debt.
I guess another one for you, Mr. Spencer. So you,
Morrison.
sorry, Morris, but kind of one of the things that at least in Austrian economics tells us is that in order for everyone to get wealthy, there needs to be a growth in the division of labor, or the amount of people specializing in what they're doing best. That is how you grow your production. And you're talking about how you want to increase everyone's economic well-being, but if we put in tariffs, we cut ourselves out from the entire division of labor that is across the world, which means that we're going to be less productive everything else equal. So can you explain how cutting ourselves off from the productivity of the rest of the world is going to increase our productivity and not make us poor?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question of time horizons, as I said. So the division of labor and trade can make you more prosperous in a static situation where you're trading output for output, but that's not actually what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a situation where we want growth over a long term. So we're not necessarily looking for the most efficient trades. We're looking for the best investments. To your point, the way that we get rich is not actually by dividing labor. You can only divide up labor so much before it becomes inefficient to divide labor any further. This is an O-ring theory of economic collapse, right? You can only have so many cooks in the kitchen before what you're making is poison. The same thing applies to literally every product. More complicated products can, of course, have more complicated supply chains. But the key to long-run economic growth is not dividing labor. The key is to have more advanced technology and to grow your technology. And a good example of that is, just look at historically. A country like, countries in Europe, for example, that adopted the Industrial Revolution technologies earlier, even though they were far more insular than free trading countries like Portugal. I mean, you compare like Sweden to Portugal. Portugal was much more well connected in terms of trade. It had a much greater international division of labor, but of course it was far, far poorer than Sweden because they simply didn't have the industrial technology adopted. Technology is what generates long-run wealth, not the division of labor and not trade.
Murray, would you like to weigh in on anything? Since
Yes.
there's a bias in the thing.
No, it's okay. It's okay. When you look at the world economy or even the domestic economy, what you notice is that people have goals. That's what made Austrian economics so attractive to me. People have goals, and they use means to achieve those goals. That's why Mises' treatise, Human Action, just spells it right out. We all act in order to achieve our goals. Those goals could be based upon domestic needs, or there's a product overseas that we like. And the other concept is that I think the notion that somehow people in Washington are smarter than the market, I would contend the market is smarter than anyone who occupies the Oval Office. And we saw this right after Nixon did wage price controls. What happened? Shortages showed up almost immediately after August 15th, 1971. So the market spoke. In fact, the black market is in fact the free market that's hampered by the government. So when you look at how governments interact with the business community, we know it's cronyism. Thank you, Patrick Newman, for all the great work you're doing on cronyism in American history. And we've seen it over the past 200 plus years. That's why Tom DiLorenzo's book, Hamilton's Curse, talks about how Hamilton and the cronies in the early America used the government for their benefit, not for the general welfare, but for their benefit. So there are two ways you can obtain wealth: the economic means or the political means. I'm in favor of the economic means because it means voluntary exchange, it means peaceful relations domestically and internationally. And again, I go back to the analogy. If other countries are really harming their citizens, why should we follow that model by undermining our own citizens? In addition, if we can get cheaper stuff from overseas, what does that mean? It frees up our income to buy domestic stuff from our neighbors. So there's the notion of a trade deficit is that it's a zero-sum game. No, trade is a positive-sum game because everyone benefits. Otherwise, you wouldn't engage in the trade. And the history of the world is not continuous because there have been brutal periods of war and inflation and depression. And who causes that? Not the business community. It's governments that cause that. So if we really want to be honest about how we achieve higher and higher living standards, we have to look at what government does to impede the resources that go into the most highly valued uses.
This man here has had his hand up for about 2 hours, I think. In the blue suit, dark blue suit.
This is directed towards Dr. Morrison, but Dr. Sabrin can comment as well. So you mentioned in your opening statement that at some point the benefits of capital accumulation eventually kind of cap out, and you don't really get increased productivity. And as here at Mises U and as Austrians, capital accumulation is very central to our thoughts. So I was wondering if you could just elaborate on what you mean by that and why you think sort of there's a point at which capital accumulation just doesn't work.
Is this to me or to Spencer? Oh, okay. No, go ahead.
Either, I think, or both.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, capital accumulation is obviously an important way to make money, but the problem is that it's capped out. If you talk about capital accumulation in a static sense, you can only plant. I go back to the example of farming, right? There's only so much land. There's only so many trees that you can plant. If we look at it in an industrial sense, there's only so much equipment that we can purchase or build that's going to produce output. The only way to, in the long term, increase productivity is to improve our technology, right? So when I'm talking about just bare capital accumulation, what I'm talking about is stagnant capital accumulation. So within a particular technological paradigm, you cap it out at a certain point because it doesn't make any sense to buy anymore. Go back to the Industrial Revolution. You can have a whole factory full of power looms, and that's great. But, until you reach the next technological paradigm, you can only get so far by accumulating equipment.
Yeah, one of the most important insights made by a business professor that the Austrians know about is, and everyone else does, is the late Julian Simon, where he wrote the ultimate resource is not capital, but human capital, human ingenuity. Human ingenuity and capital gives you great heights in the economy. And I've seen this in my lifetime from the 1950s to the present. My goodness, how things have changed in automobiles, in houses, in appliances. And here's the beauty part of the free market, and I'm using that word deliberately, is in a free market, without the Fed printing up money, prices go down, increasing the living standards for everyone in the community. And I'll give you a good example of this on a personal level. My parents bought their first TV in 1953, black and white TV, for $350. You know what that is in today's purchasing power? That's $3,500 for a little 17-inch black and white TV in a furniture console with an FM radio. You know what you can get for $3,500 today at Costco, or if they even carry a TV that much money? Slim HD TV that is incredibly sharp. This is the beauty of technology, ingenuity, and productivity. It lowers the price of things for the average citizen.
Dr. Sabrin, would you say that the current state of American production is desirable? And would you say that it is the result of free markets and free trade, or is there an alternative explanation?
Well, there are a lot of wonderful things happening all across the country. In every sector of the economy, there are entrepreneurs. And when I wrote my book on navigating the boom-bust cycle, we saw this in action when people couldn't open up their stores, and they had to, in order to stay in business, they had to be creative and ingenious in order to make sure they can sell. So they went online for the first time. There are things happening in America today we don't get, because all we do is get the Epstein files and all this other nonsense that's out there instead of what's really happening in American business. And we should read more about what's happening. There are people creating businesses every single day. Business is hard. That's why most people don't do it. And there is a lot of productivity going on in aircraft, in automobiles, in high tech, artificial intelligence, healthcare. The list goes on and on and on. There's not a limit to what what human beings can do, especially the American entrepreneur.
One more. This man in the middle back here has had his hand up right there. See that in the middle of the room. Well, maybe two more. Go ahead.
So thank you. So my question goes to the debater on the left. Please, in the last 50 years, can you share examples of countries that have used tariffs to achieve exponential technological and economic growth?
Sorry, was that a question for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of good examples. South Korea is an excellent example. Their average tariff rate when they were coming up in the 60s and 70s is well over 40%. Japan is another good example that engaged in significant tariff and non-monetary barriers to entry to their market. And the best example, frankly, is China. China's economic growth has been astronomical. The rise of China has been unprecedented. They've grown at over 8.5% every year for decades. And they've all done that with a highly protected domestic market, essentially piggybacking off of America's market, stealing American and Western technology. Yeah, so I mean, there's no question that there has actually never been a country that has industrialized without tariff protections, actually.
Last question.
My question is for Mr. Spencer. Do you acknowledge that when I, as an individual, buy foreign goods, that both parties to that trade are benefiting? And if you do you believe that there is any point at which you should stop limiting individual benefit in the name of the collective good?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there's a difference, again, between nations. I mean, we are all individuals, right? And I think everybody understands that. But the question is not, it's not the nation's role to necessarily do what is in the best interest of every individual person in the nation, because, the coalescence of individual actions can have a negative result for the whole. This is epitomized in the tragedy of the commons, for example, and this is really what we get when we're dealing with international free trade. And I use free trade loosely because we don't have free trade. We have unrestricted trade with China, who is not reciprocating, and in fact, none of these countries ultimately reciprocate. So yeah, I mean, when we're talking about government action, the body that is acting is whether it's in the common interest and not the individual's interest. There are plenty of things that I can do that are in my best interests that will harm all of you, but I'm prohibited from doing those, and vice versa, because we need to take into account not just the health of the individual, but the health of the family, of the local community, and as a nation as a whole.
Murray, would you like the last word?
Yeah, Spencer brings up a real good point. What is the responsibility of the federal government to business who are being exploited overseas or not allowed to enter the country overseas? I can't find anything in the Constitution that gives the federal government the authority to be the ombudsman for American business. If you are being undermined by governments overseas, then you better lobby those governments, just as you lobby Washington, D.C. to make things better for your company. That's what I think common sense dictates, and without being exploitive of our own people. Why should we have to pay higher prices because someone has a bone to pick with a foreign country? It doesn't make any sense to me, and it leads to, unfortunately, as history has taught us, it could lead to very serious conflicts. And that's what I think we should all be opposed to. Make sure that we diffuse the situation around the world rather than add fuel to the fire.
We will now have an arm wrestling competition to see who really won the debate. Okay, well, thank you all. Thanks, speakers. It was a great debate, very informative. Thanks for coming. And dinner time.